Thursday show, live from Salford, 43 degrees in the studio. It's probably about 23 outside. We're going to move these calls along as quick as we can. I won't be rude. You know I love you. The BBG loves you. Nobody else might love you, but I loves you. I loves you. We're going straight to the phones. Caller, welcome to the programme. Who am I speaking with?
Yeah, very good afternoon, Richie. It's Andy Newman here, calling from Bristol.
Andy Newman in Bristol. How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing all right, mate. I'm doing all right.
I might be able to hear myself in the background, so turn me down, Andy, and then come back and have a chat with me.
I will turn you down, mate.
Turn me down. I'm loud enough as it is. We don't need me twice in stereo.
That's better, isn't it?
Hey, Andy, lovely to chat with you. I bet you're boiling to death there in Bristol. It's warm.
It is warm. I'm inside, in the shade. Occasionally I do go outside and get some of those magic rays on me, get the vitamin D and everything. But it's nice to be able to chat to you again after being banned from Twitter. I managed to come back under another name.
Did you get kicked out of Twitter, did you?
I did. I got kicked out of Twitter for something I said about Extinction Rebellion.
Was it rude, Andy? You can tell me. Nobody's listening. What did you say about Extinction Rebellion?
Well, it was probably conceived to be rude, but it wasn't meant to be. Let's put it that way. But that's beside the point. I mean, I'm back under another name now. People might recognise me as Open OAP, which stands for Open-Minded Old Age Pensioner.
This is a serious issue, Andy, right? We're going to move the calls along quickly, but I'm not going to dump you off. I want to keep you on for a minute because I'm enjoying listening to you. I've got loads backed up. This is a serious issue. Whatever you think about Trump or don't think about him, it seems that Trump said something about, ballot boxes and stuffing ballot boxes in California. It seemed to be fairly benign. It seemed also that he might have had a point. And then Twitter put some information underneath his tweet basically saying that it needed to be fact-checked. What's going on with Twitter and Facebook? Why are we even talking about this still? Go ahead, Andy.
Well, it's the same with YouTube, Richie. I mean, if you go onto anybody's YouTube channel and they post anything that's even slightly different from the accepted narrative, then YouTube put a note on there saying about this website.
Yeah.
And they try and point you in another direction. I mean, a typical example is Dr. Vernon Coleman.
Yeah.
Who Peter Ebdon mentioned the other day, and I tweeted you about. I mean, he's saying some remarkably interesting things in short YouTube videos that last about 10 minutes, and he's saying more sense in 10 minutes than the entire mainstream media do since this whole farce began.
He's pretty sharp, isn't he? I've reached out to him, by the way. He's not an easy man to get. I think Peter might have contact details for him, so I'm going to invite him on the programme.
He calls himself an old man in a chair.
That's right. So what this guy is doing, what this very learned guy is doing, is he's saying, look, there's another way to look at the virus and the lockdown. And yet underneath his posts, YouTube are basically saying, this guy's a bit strange now. It's what they're doing effectively, right?
They're suggesting that, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I think the bottom line is, Richie, and I won't hog the phone any longer than I have done, people do not like to be told they are wrong. People do not like to be told that they've been fooled. And even people of my generation, and some of them quite close friends of mine over the last few years, get up in the air if I try and say to them, look, it's really pretty damn obvious that we're being conned here.
Being had.
And they say, oh, no, you're a conspiracy theorist and all that kind of stuff. And that's all that people have got to come back to it. All I ask is that if I post something on Facebook or Twitter or anything else that people don't agree with, go out and do their own research and see what they come up with.
Just before you go, Andy, thanks for calling in, by the way. I've got Andrea, who's in Australia next, and then we're off to Bulgaria, I believe. It's hectic. It's nice. I love that. Before we go, how did we get there? How did we get to that place where, as people, we get personally offended when somebody disagrees with an opinion? How did we get there, or were we always there?
Well, to an extent, we were always there, but probably the rise of social media, and particularly Twitter and Facebook, obviously, being the two main ones.
Well, I hope you're
become mob rule. It's become mob rule. Say something that people don't like, and they're only like a ton of bricks, as your journalist colleague.
You love that, don't you? Don't you love this phrase, Twitter, do your thing, an incitement to bully and harass somebody because they said something that is deemed unsayable. You mentioned, before I take Andrea in Australia, you mentioned OAP. You're not an OAP, Andy, are you?
I am, yeah, I am 66.
I tell you what.
Yes, I am an OAP.
The reason I ask that is because the people who stream me and the people who look after the podcast, they struggle to try and get any handle on the demographic. They have no idea, really. And to be honest with you, I don't either. I think it's just great, really. You know, you'd like to know, is it 45 to 70-year-olds? Is it 20-year-olds to 50? You know, you'd like to know. You might be able then to... you know, in terms of going to advertising companies, you might be able to try and make some money, but we just don't have a clue, really. But no, it makes me laugh, that. Andy, I love.
I think you've got listeners of all ages all over the world, Richie, and long may it continue.
I would guess so, Andy. Listen, mate, you're very kind. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah, it's a tragedy that. I mean, judging by what you've been saying, you've not been insulting people or using bad language against people, but then they delete your account or delete. This is the way we're going in 2020.
The thing is that you don't get any comeback. Your account's deleted, and you appeal.
You can't challenge it,
and they just send you an automatic electronic sort of email thing that says the same thing over and over again. It's as if you're actually talking to a computer, and you probably are.
And you probably are. Andy, you have a brilliant weekend, mate. Thanks very much for phoning in. Love to hear from you today. That was Andy in Bristol. And we're off to Australia next to speak to Andrea, who got in touch earlier on today, actually. Let me know that she was going to be around. So she's an well, she's not an ex, because if you're a Geordie, you're always a Geordie. She's an expat living down under. Andrea, welcome to the programme. How are you?
Hey, I'm great, Richie. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Which part of Oz are you in?
I'm in North Queensland, a place called Mackay on the east coast.
So is it stupid o'clock then Friday morning there?
It is. I got the alarm set at 10 to 3 this morning. I was so excited I could hardly sleep.
Me head is 5 times the size it was when I came into the studio. I never get that sort of compliment. Well, thanks for it's lovely to meet you first and foremost. I know you've been listening to programs like this for a while. What's it like then, North Queensland? What's lockdown been like for you there?
It really hasn't been as harsh as what the English people have gone through. I speak with my family regularly and can't believe that you can't even get a coffee. We've never had a McDonald's close. We've never had the restaurants have set aside their tables, but you can still get takeaways. They've jumped onto Uber Eats, and yes, we had the toilet paper issue and the flour and what have you, but really life has continued pretty much as normal.
Well, that's very interesting now, because it hasn't been normal here, and you obviously know that because you'll have friends and family over here. It hasn't been. Is that a cultural thing, do you think? Are Australians a little bit more rebellious? I mean, it's a country full of criminals, isn't it? It's the descendants of our worst, Well, it isn't really, but do you think they're a bit more inclined towards rebellion? What do you think?
I don't know whether it's a rebellion thing. It's just they haven't had any evidence, I don't know. It didn't get to a media frenzy the way it did in the UK, right. And people are looking around going, well, I don't see anybody sick. I haven't heard of anything. One isolated case, 2 isolated cases. They did close down the borders, so they did lock it down in that regard. But we are not in winter. We are just heading into winter now. It could have been that it takes, as you say, the flu season or something like that, which we haven't had.
Of course, I should have thought of that. That's right. Yeah, you're at the tail end of autumn now, heading into winter, and
That's right.
And maybe at some stage, and let's hope not, but maybe at some stage somebody will say that the virus is prevalent, and maybe things will change. How fascinating. that is, and that's I mean, such a vast country. So different regions of the country then have taken different approaches. Would you say to it?
Absolutely, because they've got their state law. Each state has taken a different slant on things, opening up in different states, gatherings of 10. Restaurants can now take up to 10, or depending on the size, that patrons, so you're well spaced out. You have to do leave your name and address when you go there to eat, and the restaurant keeps that information. They don't actually hand it over to the government.
Leave your name and address, but I tell you what, Andrea,
yes.
That is sinister, that, isn't it? I mean, even that alone is terribly sinister. Leave your name and address so that they can keep track of whom you're accompanying to the restaurant. Is that it?
Well, it's for safety. That's what they're saying, and luckily it doesn't go from the restaurant to the government until, say, there was an outbreak, and then they would start, investigating. But just the fact they feel awful, they'll apologise and say, look, we're sorry, but if you're going to dine here, would you please leave your name and address? At least one of you. So yeah, that is a bit strange, and the same as the track and trace. They're doing all of this. Hey, I've got heaps to say. Max Igren's been kicked off Facebook.
Max has been booted off of Facebook. When did that happen?
I don't know when it happened, but I just thought, I haven't seen anything from him. That's gone. The
page is gone. And he had, as far as I can remember, he had hundreds of thousands of followers there.
Yep, he did. So, yeah, that's happened. But, yeah, it's madness. I was talking to my niece. She's in Yorkshire. She doesn't know anybody who's had the virus. They're just unbelievable. And there's nobody I know has had this or knows anybody who's had it.
And I have to say the same thing. I know back around Christmas and right through January and early February, I was particularly unwell, but I don't know what that was, No,
I was exactly the same. I flew to the UK to have Christmas with my family, and we all got sick. And my husband, who you can't drag him to a doctor, he hates them. He took himself. He was that worried about this chest infection. The doctor looked at it and it was clear as, mucus or anything like that. It was just a real bad cough. He couldn't catch his breath and things like that. And the doctor said, look, I'll give you some antibiotics. And he had to take 2 courses to shake it. And he's a fit, healthy bloke. And
if it was a virus, the antibiotics were useless anyway. And,
exactly.
And eventually his system cleared it out. That's exactly what happened to me. No mucus. I would get chest infections fairly regularly. I'm bloody open to them. And after a while, you begin to break up the mucus and you don't feel so bad and you can breathe easier. This particular time, there was nothing blocking, but the breathing was absolutely down to its worst. And when I heard this emergency room doctor in New York talking about altitude sickness, I began to wonder, what is this? That's why I don't say that there was no virus. Something was definitely going around, but like you today, I don't know anybody who's been ill. The hospital, Salford General, is not full. It's not even remotely near full. It hasn't been at any time during the so-called pandemic. And, these Nightingale hospitals are empty. They haven't been used. Nurses and doctors seem to be able to find time to put on plays and concerts and stuff, And you wonder...
It's like
dance. Wow.
It's unreal. And I've got friends on Facebook over there. They're absolutely terrified. They're like, well, I'm not rushing back to work, and there's this danger, and they're getting Boris Johnson, he's a useless so and so, and I'm looking at them thinking, you haven't got a clue. You've followed the herd in the beginning, and now you're criticising him because they probably know it's nothing. It's not as serious that, if it is out there, well, you can recover quite easily from it.
Let me put this to you. I'm keeping you on now for a bit because you get up at 10 to 3 in the morning. If I get rid of you now, I'll be the biggest bastard of all time. So you better stay with me for a couple of more minutes. Let me ask you this. Do you think... it's occurred to me, it's not this isn't my brainwave. I did read this in one of the newspapers, but maybe a lot of us have jobs that we do, and we do them solely to survive. We don't do them out of any great love for them. A lot of jobs for people are soul destroying, even if they pay well. Jobs are monotonous, and it's a terrible thing. I could be here all day talking about it. I wonder how many people want the lockdown to continue for a period because they're fed up with their jobs and they're happy to be furloughed and to be paid 90% of their wages to sit in the garden, Andrea, in this gorgeous weather. What do you think?
That's right. Absolutely. I've got a friend who fits that description 100%. Happy as a little pig in shit that he has had some house renovations. He's got into his gardening. He's as brown as a berry because the sun's been so kind to you. And he does not want to go back to work next week. He would like it to continue. So I think there's some people who are saying, I'm really scared. It's not that they're scared. It's just that they're using that as an excuse not to go back to work.
Yeah, and part of me has great sympathy for them because I've got friends, not just here in the UK, but back home, and their jobs depress them. And they've enjoyed not being to work for the last 6 or 7 weeks. They're loving it. And I've been wondering, are you some of these anonymous accounts trolling, online, saying that we need to have more lockdown and criticising people like Cummings? I don't know, but it's strange. What about the future then, Andrea? Just finally, and thanks for getting up and coming on and talking to me. What about the future and the so-called new normal? That's scary stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because I've got older relatives who are buying into this distancing, and they're just compliant. That's what really I cannot believe is how many people are just taking this lying down.
Yeah, the compliance.
It's like, to me, it's like a social experiment.
Yeah, Kevin talked about it in the first hour of the program. His shock. Everybody seems to be absolutely stunned at how people have gone. I mean, forget because before anybody realised that they could have time off of work and get paid for it, before all of that, people were very quick to obey, weren't they? They were immediately.
Yep. Yep. Total fear. It was just, and I've looked at the stats myself. It's no different to the 2018 flu epidemic or flu season or whatever you want to call it.
No, it isn't. Are you a lady, Andrea, are you a lady who, I can't make assumptions. Are you somebody who likes to shop? Do you like to go and browse and shop and look at clothes? I would imagine most women do. I know a lot of guys who do. Do you like to do that? I mean, look at what they're saying to people like you. They're saying that, which is nearly everybody. They're saying that from now on, one exit and one entrance for the shops. You've got to keep meters apart inside the shop. There will be hand sanitizers. If you happen to try on a pair of shoes, Andrea, and the future Mrs. Allen wants to try them on, and it's the only pair in the shop, well, tough shit, Paddy. They're going to go into quarantine for 24 hours. This is madness, isn't it?
Absolutely, it really is. And people will just accept it.
They'll just accept it.
And I don't know where is this the aluminium? Have we had our intelligence suppressed?
Sucked
I don't
out
know.
Of us.
I really don't.
Sucked out of us. How did you end up in Oz? Did you marry an Australian? Is that how you ended up out there?
Yes, I did. And it's funny. The first marriage didn't work, but the second one's fabulous. And I've made it my home. I still miss Blighty, the family connection and things like that. But yeah, it's a new way of life.
You're loving it out there. I wouldn't go there for all the money in the world. And the truth, and I've said this before, and the truth is, I shouldn't give this away really. Spiders and creepy crawlies. There's no way you could get me there. And you've got massive stuff. You've got everything. It's Jurassic Park out there. Let's be honest.
It is.
And you're out there, yeah.
And, and I watched Jaws at a very impressionable age, and I'm convinced there's sharks in swimming pools at night time.
So it's not just you see. There's me just thinking creepy crawlies. Of course, even if you went to the beach, I know you're telling me swimming pools as well. Thanks for getting up, by the way, and thanks for connecting.
You're welcome. honestly, Rich, I've been listening to you for years. You are doing an amazing job. Hang in there. Please keep going. We need re-educating. We need some norm. We need sanity people around us.
We need to have a giggle every now and then, don't we?
I've got my son hooked on you. He's 14. Him and I have been listening to you for a good few years, and even down to Gardasil.
Oh, that's lovely. What's his name, Andrea? What's your son's name?
Jamie.
It's Jamie. He's in bed, obviously. So if he does listen to this later on, Jamie, how you doing? Thanks for listening.
Oh, he's thrilled. He said, "Can I get up, Mum?" I said, "No, you forgot to go to school." So no, he will. He'll be thrilled about that. But no, they tried to give Gardasil the boys here, and I said, "Nah, no way." And I let him listen to the podcast. And so he's got an understanding. He's not scared of the virus. He never has been from the beginning.
There you went now. There you went and said something else that's bloody interesting. Hang on a second now. So Gardasil, of course, which is the nonsense vaccine for human papillomavirus, which nobody needs anyway. No. And they wanted to give it to boys. Well, they do want to, not just down under, but everywhere. And you, amazingly, are saying my son is not having it. Was there any opposition to to Jamie not having it?
No, there wasn't. It was a consent form, and I just said no to that. He was due his last booster, which I was kind of pressurised into, like his dad's into vaccines and stuff like that. Gets a flu shot every year religiously, and I said, well, look, I'll take him to our own doctor, so that I will be present. I did my best to get him healthy and give him all this, supplements before and after, because I was terrified in case there was any adverse effects. And he did actually come out with a rash, which in a way was a blessing, because I took him back to the doctor, and the doctor agrees with me that possibly he shouldn't have any more vaccines. So it kind of worked out.
It worked out,
quite well. Yeah, that it's on his records. But no, I did object to that Gardasil, and I know from what you've said, and I've done my own research on it, that we don't need it. It's
of course
disgusting.
We don't. Women don't need it.
No, and it was actually a Scottish scientist or whatever who was working in Australia with a government grant who came up with the damn thing.
Yeah, you're basically saying, this is going to sound very crass, but you're basically saying, if you insist that a girl has it, you're basically saying you're a slut, or you might be, promiscuous or whatever. It's ridiculous. Andrea, I've got calls coming in from all over the bloody place. I'll take a few more. No, listen, I've loved having you, by the way. I've loved listening to you. So thanks, and give Jamie your regards and your husband as well. And I'm sure we'll hook up again in the future. And thanks for listening.
Oh, awesome, Richie. You're doing an amazing job. Thank you for your time.
You're very kind.
Thanks, listeners, for being patient.
It was not at all. It was brilliant. Well, fascinating, very interesting, very important information there. Yeah. They want the boys to have Gardasil. The boys. Look, that's a whole other programme. I think we've done it to death anyway. I've got a mobile call coming in now. Somebody who's been exceptionally patient. Exceptionally patient. Caller, welcome to the programme. Who am I speaking with?
Hello. Hi there, Richie. This is Julian. We spoke at Christmas when I'd come back from Syria.
We did, Julian.
It was a very long time ago.
Welcome back, mate. How are you?
Great to speak to you again. And my goodness, it feels like a different world that we're in.
It is.
Now. And a good question someone asked me was, why is it called social distancing and not physical distancing?
That's a really good point, isn't it? Who came up with that term and why? Words are so important, aren't they, for the people behind these agendas? Phrasing things is very important, yeah.
Well, I've got some more words from you. Maybe you can tell me where they come from.
Go on.
A little quiz for you on the Richie Allen Show. The horrible thing about the 2 minutes hate was not that one was obliged to act a part, but that it was impossible to avoid joining in.
You've stumped me, Julian.
Well, I wonder if the listeners will know. It's from 1984.
I was going to guess 1984. Because I've read 1984, but if I say that, I'll get it wrong. How prescient in 2020, eh?
Yeah, well, it feels like that every Thursday night, and tonight's the last one. It always reminds me of the 2 minutes hate. And I think it's been called off before it petered out or turned into something else.
Is that right? Because the woman allegedly responsible for this clap for the NHS, she's been doing the rounds of the media today saying that we should end it now because it's become something different. It served its purpose. But you think that it was just going to die out anyway, naturally, of its own volition?
It might have died out, or people were trying to start a boo for Boris.
Maybe, yeah.
So you never know. But
that goes. Sorry, Julian.
We
live in strange times. That goes to what we've been speaking about all evening. Really, this kind of acquiescence of people. My jaw was dropping. Listen, I could find some way to understand on the first Thursday when people who had been scared, basically shitless by their media and by their government, and they believed that their nurses and doctors were really in imminent danger. So they believed it. So on Thursday 1, I could understand some people saying, okay, let's join in with this neighbourly clap and all that. But by the second and third one, I couldn't believe that people were still getting involved in it. And yet they were unquestioning, almost full of fervour and passion. What's happened to us? How have we become so acquiescent? Or again, were we always?
Absolutely. Well, and people who voted for the party that tried to destroy the NHS seem to clap the loudest. I don't know whether that's because they feel guilty. We've had the what's he called, Sergeant Tom, Captain Tom, whatever he was promoted to, marching up and down, and everyone getting so behind that, which reminded me very much of. Do you remember the film? Where they talk about Good Old Shoe. I forget the name of the film, but they have this propaganda campaign, and all of a sudden everyone gets behind it, and it's a complete sort of they have a made-up war. What's it called? Wag the Dog. That's it.
Wag the Dog. Dustin Hoffman, if I remember. That's right.
Yeah, and it's all just. It turns out to be completely fake, but it's this way of everyone getting behind it, getting behind the campaign, and it goes viral, as many things do these days. But are we just parroting what we're being told to say?
I don't hold much hope, really. I don't want to be saying this. I don't want to be bringing people's moods down or upsetting people. But when I see that level of acceptance of the agenda, when I see that level of participation, Julian, I don't really have too much hope for what's coming down the line in terms of whether we'll be able to prevent it. However, I'm beginning to believe, I totally believe that the weather, our global temperatures will plummet by the end of this next decade, the so-called Maunder minimum, and things are going to change. I wonder if nature will come to our rescue. And I don't mean some cataclysmic weather event, but whether, when that happens, whether people will begin to understand at that stage that they've been hoodwinked, they've been lied to, they've been had, and maybe then there'll be some social change. But until then, I hold no hope, mate. I think the more they're spoon-fed, the more misery heaped upon them, the more they'll go along with it. What do you think?
Well, I'll leave you with not a quote, but I'm going to paraphrase Malcolm X, because I saw quite a good video the other day with a clip of him saying that during the Second World War, the US was able to convince the public to hate Germany and Japan and love China and Russia because they were on their side.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the war was over, they very quickly told them the complete opposite, and China and Russia became the victims of the 2-minute hate. Once again. So we seem to just follow along very, very quickly.
That is an amazing point you've just made there, Julian. And the often mentioned late, great Jim Marrs once spoke about that very thing to me. US attitudes towards China and Russia pre-war and post-war. And Jim said to me once, I'll never forget it, he said, Richie, it was almost like wrestling, where the character, the actor, one month he's a heel, he's a bad guy. Yeah. Next month he's turned into a good guy, and he's the victim. And the public, the crowds that turn up to the wrestling, they don't bat an eyelid, they just go along with it. Amazing, really.
Absolutely. Well, great show, Richie.
Julian, you're a gent, mate. Thanks for calling in again. Lovely to hear from you. Good to speak to you. And we're going to Andy in Surrey now. Andy's been waiting a while to get on as well. So it's Andy in Surrey, and there are plenty of calls coming in. This is the Richie Allen Radio Show, Thursday's programme. If you're just joining the programme, Kevin Myers was with me in the first hour. It's an extraordinary conversation. Don't miss it. It'll be on Spotify, Podomatic, YouTube, the usual later on in the evening. Andy's in Surrey. Welcome to the programme, Andy. Good to have you on, my friend. Have you come indoors from sun? Have you come into the shade?
It's been a hot one, isn't it, today?
It's been glorious today, yeah. It's warm in studio up here. Tell me this, I'm delighted that you've got in touch today, because Boston Dynamics robots on your mind, Andy. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, it's the something that's caught my attention. There's been a few news posts, BBC, Wired, and others. The use of drones and these Boston Dynamic robots for battling coronavirus. And you had a guest on last month, I think it was, Mark McFarlane, the 5G engineer, and he was kind of trying to get through to your listeners what 5G might all be about. And I've got a different take on it. See, I think the whole Internet of Things, which 5G will enable, is going to enable things like drones and robots, automated systems, basically, to be patrolling the streets completely unsupervised as such. And the thing is, we're talking about an economic collapse coming in the next, 12, 18 months or whatever. Crime rates potentially going to go through the roof, rioting, police cuts because there's no money to pay for it. But what's going to be the solution? They always throw technology at us. So maybe we need an army of drones to be patrolling, the skies. We need, robot dogs on the street. It sounds mental.
It doesn't, Andy. It doesn't, because I've seen Gareth, David's son, Gareth. I follow Gareth on Twitter. Yeah. He's been posting some videos of these dogs, these Boston Dynamic robot dogs.
Doing in Singapore right now.
Yeah, doing stuff like giving people messages, but also even, dare I say this, did I see a video where they were herding sheep or other animals or something like that? So they're that sophisticated already.
Yes. So, and they're promoting it. So if you go on BBC News, you'll see, maybe once a week, if you dig into the technology section, you'll see, posts about these things. And the thing with Boston Dynamics is, they're funded by DARPA. So that's the research arm of the Pentagon. Yeah. And they came out of MIT, and they were originally at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And their kind of raison d'etre was to build military robots. That's what they're founded to do. So now they've kind of moved into this more kind of civilian kind of arm, where they're putting out these robot dogs or whatever, but their DNA is absolutely military, right? It's right from the Pentagon. At one point they were owned by Alphabet, which is obviously the parent company of Google. They've since been sold. So we have to really keep an eye on what this company is up to. And there's a paper on their website, actually. You go to bostondynamics.com/COVID-19, and they list all of the things that they want to be doing next, like remote surveillance, putting body temperature sensors on these dogs, being able to measure respiratory rate, pulse rate, oxygen saturation, basically, to be patrolling to sort of monitor our vital signs as we're going about our business. And it just sounds... I know it sounds crazy. Anyone who's listening to this who hasn't come across this before will think, who is this guy? He's talking absolute rubbish.
No, but you're not, as you said yourself.
Technology exists. It's ready to go. They're just waiting for the crisis, right?
And you think 5G then would enable these things to be controlled, but also enable them to communicate between themselves?
They'll communicate. Yes, exactly what they'll do. So the drones, you can imagine, 1,000 drones in the sky. Yeah. All connected on their own private Wi-Fi network. So they're talking to each other. If there's a disturbance in one part of the city, you could, have swarms of these drones all converging at the same point. Who knows where this is going to go, right? Start fitting tasers on them. It sounds crazy. But...
Do you think then, when you think back, I know you will have seen it, everybody has seen it, Terminator, 1984, whenever it came out.
Yeah.
So they envisaged the future whereby the machines would become self-sufficient and would begin to make their own decisions. And you look at this stuff, they've got these drones. They've been flying over cities in France telling people to get indoors.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Sure, I mean, was that predictive programming then, Andy, back in the 1980s?
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? So I think we look at the technology that's in the public arena now and we think that's the cutting edge. But so much of this stuff, this is, I would imagine this technology has been in the deep underground bunkers, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Military technology, above top secret, already designed, ready to go, waiting. And like all these things, Richie, it's always, I know it gets a bit cliched, isn't it? The whole problem, reaction, solution thing. But it's a problem. What is the problem? Well, it's COVID-19. Solution, well, we can't have human contact because that spreads the virus. Well, what do we have as an alternative then? Well, we better start sending robot dogs and drones out because they spread the virus.
They've been delivering parcels in parts of the UK. Yeah. Drones have in this country.
You just have to wonder, where does it end? I mean, like I said a few minutes ago, I think you're bang on the money. There's going to be an absolute economic collapse, the likes of which we've never seen, and it kind of terrifies me, right? Because if you think of where that leads, I mean, crime rate. I know it sounds really depressing here, but crime's going to go through the roof. Rioting. It's going to be a pretty bleak future if we don't sort this out.
A friend of mine said to me the other day, I won't mention which friend, and he said, over the next 12 months or so, Richie, he said, maybe you might want to think about keeping, this is true now, I'm going to say, I might get into trouble for saying this. He said, you might want to think about keeping a weapon or two at your property. And I said, not in a million years. And he said, I'm telling you. He said, I'm telling you. He said, get a license to have a shotgun. You can get one and have one. I said, no, I'm never going to own a gun. Well, he said, get a couple of baseball bats or a couple of hurleys, which is the Irish sport, of course, hurling, or get a cricket bat or something. He said, because when it gets really bad, Richie, and people have nowhere else to go, they'll turn on each other in communities in ways that we never imagined. He said to me,
Yeah, I think this is the worrying thing, is that civilization, there's a lot of very good people out there, but I think civilization as a whole is quite a thin veneer. And once you start taking food away and you start taking security away, those that are, let's say, more inclined towards violence, they won't need an excuse anymore. It will just become instinct.
Let me ask you, Andy, because you've looked into it a little bit. I'm not putting you on the spot at all now. Sure. I don't want to put you on the spot. Does Boston Dynamics have capable, upward-standing, humanoid type robots? Yes. Do they? Yes, are they any good?
Yes, they're incredible. You go onto YouTube. I can't remember the names of them, but if you just type in Boston Dynamics human robot, they've got ones which can literally dance. They can jump fences. If you push them over, they can right themselves and get back standing again.
Jesus Christ! I
mean, and those were the ones that were originally funded by DARPA. They were going to be the kind of military alternative to human soldiers. And then the Pentagon kind of pulled the project by saying they were too loud, too noisy to be used. But it's been designed, and now they've gone into these dogs. And the thing is, you go and look at these robot dogs. They call it Spot. And I know you own dogs, Richie. They move and they act like a dog. They have all the same mannerisms. I'm surprised they haven't stuck a tail on it,
But this takes me back to the Japanese Tamagotchi bollocks and all that. Do you remember that, Andy?
I do, yeah. I'm old enough to remember that.
But no, I'm not saying that for a giggle. I'm sure people, it might sound a bit funny. I don't mean you laughing, but people might say, oh, that's funny. But again, the idea that you would have a pet that isn't, it isn't biological. It isn't, it's not flesh and blood. It's a bloody robot.
It's a mechanical pet. And that's what so if you look at if you just go onto BBC from a couple of weeks ago, you can see this one patrolling Singapore. And it's all kind of gimmicky, right? You've got people there with their smartphones taking pictures of it, and it kind of looks, cute and funny. But then you just have to think, well, where they're not. This stuff hasn't been designed to be just a gimmick, right?
Yeah.
You don't pump billions of dollars into something just for it to be a gimmick. It's it's deadly serious, and we might start to see in the next few years, what this type of technology can actually do.
Wouldn't you love to get a hold of the police officers in Minneapolis who suffocated a man to death on Monday, George Floyd?
Yeah, shocking, wasn't it?
Shocking. And I'm not trying to virtue signal by bringing it up, not in the least now. But wouldn't you love to say to these bastards, wouldn't you love to say, you know what, guys, this is what's going to replace you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this look in the mirror. 10 years from now, this will replace, in the smart cities, there aren't going to be human police officers. There's going to be drones, and there's going to be a few kind of civilian operators that are very well paid. But it's mostly going to be patrolled, armies of drones, armies of robot dogs and whatever on the streets. And you say about predictive programming, there's a book from the 1950s by quite a famous author called Ray Bradbury. It's called Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
And in that, he talks about mechanical dogs armed with tranquilizer darts that go around hunting down the dissidents.
Jesus Christ.
And that was 1950.
1950, yeah.
Yeah. So this stuff isn't, it's been considered for a long time.
I wonder if any of these writers,
we're ready.
This is it, Andy. No, sorry to interrupt you, mate. I shouldn't be interrupting you. It's your slot here. I wonder how many of these writers. This is stupid now. This is out of left field. we suspect that time is not linear. I wonder how many of these guys, weren't just very good at predicting stuff. I wonder how many of them actually got a glimpse of it somehow.
Well, Aldous Huxley.
Yeah.
The rumor is that he was a deep insider. And then he wrote Brave New World based on, on the information he'd been given, because that was, 1920s, early 1930s. He wrote that book.
Yeah.
And he's talking about DNA manipulation. He's talking about, genetic modification of humanity, kind of all the crazy stuff we see now.
I have a final question for you. There is one mobile call that's been trying to get in for ages, just like you. By the way, thanks for your patience, by the way. Just before I take the final call, is there any getting out of this, Andy, do you think? Have we any chance of getting out of it before it happens?
Do you know what? This is... I'm not sure. I tend to side a little bit here with Max Eigen, who thinks it's already gone too far. I don't think we're ever going back to the way things were before. If we're gonna build something good from this world, we have to start telling the truth as human beings, because that's why we're in this mess, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because our civilization's built on deception from the ground up. We tell. I myself, I'm not perfect. I tell lies, and I'm guilty of that. But it kind of permeates throughout our entire society, and I think that's how we've allowed ourselves to be occupied the way that we have. I mean, you look at these politicians we've got now; they just, wouldn't trust them to tell the time in a room full of clocks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And people have to. I think people need to come to the understanding that they're basically managers of public life. They don't obviously come up with these policies that they manage. They come from elsewhere, and people need to understand that. But we don't.
And maybe as a final point here, Richie.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe things just have to get a little bit worse before they start to get a bit better.
Maybe
it's enough. Then they might start thinking.
That's it, Andy. Maybe there's a tipping point. Maybe there's an event that might transpire. Something might happen where it does shake people in a way that never happened before. I hope so. Thanks for coming back on, Andy. Lovely to chat with you again. I know it's been a long time since you were on.
It has, yeah. Jeremy Corbyn had just been elected last time.
The last time you spoke to me, so that's 3.5, nearly 4 years ago, last time you came on the programme. I remember you well, because I do have a great memory like that. Thanks so much, mate. Lovely to have you on. And thanks for all that info about Boston Dynamics. It's fascinating.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Thanks, Andy. Bye for now. That was Andy. And I'm going to take one final call now. I've got 3 minutes to take this. Very patient caller. Caller, welcome to the programme. Who am I speaking with?
Hello.
Hi, who am I speaking to?
Hi, Richie. I wasn't sure if you were talking to me. It's Melanie from Newcastle. I've spoken to you before.
You have in the past, Melanie. Welcome back. I'm sorry to have kept you waiting so long. I really, really mean that. It's been fairly busy. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to shut up, Melanie, and I'm going to give you the floor. Go ahead.
Well, the reason I called Richie is because you keep referring to anthropology. And I graduated in sociology and anthropology quite a long time ago. And what it does is it gives you a lens to look at the world, and that might be a bit of a curse because it's not a very nice world to be looking at right now.
No, but at the same time, it must be fascinating, Melanie. I mean, it must be. I mean, studying human behaviour. I mean, have you been surprised by the public's reaction to what's been happening?
I've been mortified, actually, because I've followed the likes of yourself and, you know, the alternative media for a very, very, well, since the early 90s. So I've kept abreast of, you know, of thinking and seen too much evidence of wrongdoing by people who, you know, are in charge.
Yeah.
And this movement towards an elite takeover. I mean, it's just, you know, and now we have it. It's glaringly obvious to me, which is horrible. I wish it wasn't, but that's how it seems.
That's how it feels.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's happened really quickly. I know that it's been building up, like you just said there, Melanie. It's been building up for many years. We've seen the signs of it. But it almost seems like in the last few months, it's like it just accelerated like 1,000 miles an hour, right?
It seems like it's accelerated 1,000 miles an hour with all of the different strands of what's been talked about. You know, people suspected this, that, and the other. And the whole thing has just, it's just rolled in so fast. It's really, really terrifying. It is, you know, and the fact that, I mean, I can't have a conversation with anyone that I know that don't want to talk to me, that don't want to listen to me.
That's very difficult, that, isn't it? It's
yeah, it is. Yeah, I've got no one to speak to. You know, they won't even listen. Won't even, I don't know, listen to a YouTube video and discuss it with me. You know, just to try and introduce people to these ideas. Just don't want to know.
I very rarely, in radio being radio, I very rarely get, you know, recognised. You wouldn't get recognised too often. But a few weeks back, a chap came running up to me in near, I think I was near Liverpool Street, and gave me a big hug. I was running, I was out jogging, and said he was a listener, and he was a bit emotional. And the reason he wanted to come over was not to say, oh, you know, you're brilliant and all this nonsense, was that he doesn't have anybody to speak to about these things. And the fact that there are, you know, places...
He gave you a hug.
Gave me a big man hug, yeah. He gave me a big man hug, yeah. And he said, you know, that I don't have anybody to discuss these things with, but of an afternoon, I know that I'll hear from people today, from people like you, obviously Melanie and everybody else, people who see it as I see it. And it occurred to me then when I was running home, I thought how difficult it is to have an understanding of what's going on and yet be surrounded by people whom are obdurate or obstinate, stubborn, don't want to listen to it, to the point that they get belligerent sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, my next door neighbour today said, you know, that the lockdown's going to stop too soon, and just to be surrounded by, you know, I know tonight there's going to be an awful lot of the pans banging outside, and it's really, really heartbreaking, because the way that I've kind of like seen it very, very recently is that if they had a plan, you could see that, you know, first of all, we should do this, and then we need to assess it. And it's probably taken them by surprise how well it's gone down so far, you know, and then all of a sudden they have to kind of think of, you know, the next part of the plan probably before they assumed that they would have to.
That's a really good point.
Does that make sense?
It makes
just seems like
sense.
I know or really, rather, I instinctively feel that, this hasn't happened by accident, for goodness sake.
No.
The plan is in place. It's been there probably a very long time, and there are steps that they need to take the change through. And I just think this is probably taken by surprise that it's worked so well.
You made a very good point a moment ago as well. You said that the strands of this all accelerated together at the same time. I mean, you look at cashless society, that's perfect, that's working. Yep. People informing on their friends and neighbours, well, that expedited really quickly. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, David Icke always talked about the spider's web. With the central goal in the middle and all the strands, moving away from it. Everything. It's all here now. I mean, the digital health passport, Melanie, that we've been talking about this week.
Yeah.
That's ready to go, and I think people will probably grab it with two hands because they will be told that, well, it'll make life much easier. The lockdown can ease a bit.
My neighbours certainly will. And I mean, we don't even live in a I'm in a village rather than a town. But just everyone's sold on this whole thing. And interesting, your previous caller, and the last time I spoke to you, I was quite a big focus on the transgender agenda, and I just think that people's heads have been so battered with kind of being encouraged into a chaotic kind of thinking and normalizing the abnormal. I always thought that was linked to this bigger thing, and my thinking hasn't changed. I really do, and I do think that they will march the robots out. I was driving last year through Milton Keynes, and something caught my eye. Actually, I wasn't driving, I was a passenger. And there was a robot dog at the side of the road.
No way, Melanie.
Seriously, I got the shock of my life.
What was it like? Can you remember what it looked like? I mean, it might sound like a stupid question.
We just drove past, but yes, it was just like a dog. And it was pootling along the pavement in a large industrial area. So there wasn't a lot of traffic. But, I was on YouTube months and months ago and quite distressed to see someone had done a film on should robots have human rights.
Yes.
And I think that's where we're going with all of this. Like I said, you sort of like introduce people to the idea of the abnormal being normal, and then you insist on it, and then you do that, Yes, it's all very sinister.
Well, I remember back in 2018, just before we wrap up today. I'm glad you got through, by the way. I really am. It's lovely to chat with you again, Melanie. I remember
Thank you.
No, it really is. I remember back in 2018. I'm trying to think off the top of my head now. There was a robot called Sophia in Saudi Arabia. Do you remember this? And I think they gave the robot rights equivalent to the rights of women there, which aren't very good anyway. But they gave they gave the robot rights maybe that women in Saudi Arabia don't have. So, somebody might have listened to you and thought, oh, Melanie sounds lovely, but she's in cloud cuckoo land there. She's not in cloud cuckoo land. The idea of granting rights to robots is already in our consciousness. It's already in our world. It happened in Saudi Arabia. If I remember right, the robot actually addressed an assembly there and answered questions. Yeah. This is bizarre stuff, isn't it?
Well, they brought her out onto Good Morning TV, I think it was last year.
Did they?
They rolled her out, and she's sitting there, and they were bragging about how she had a discourse regarding international rights, and it was all linked to the UN.
And do you know what makes me, again, I love the way we connect the dots. When I say we, I don't mean me, I don't do anything, but how the guests...
Yes, you do.
No, I don't. No, I'm not looking for compliments either. No, the guests and the listeners connect the dots. You've just connected a major dot for me now. There's been a major television series, hasn't there, based on the old film with Yul Brynner, Westworld.
West, absolutely.
Now, am I right in
sat and
saying?
watched it.
Did you watch it? Am I right in saying that the director of that is trying to get the audience to be sympathetic to the robots? You know, they
I've
want.
had the same. I've had the same thought.
Yeah. The robots are used in a theme park, and they get shot by the visitors in a Wild West situation. Then they get patched up and sent back out again because they're robots. But the robots have consciousness, apparently, and the viewer is being kind of almost invited to feel sorry for the robots. And I'm just wondering, is there an agenda to make people sympathetic to robots? And bloody hell, there you are.
I really do think that is the case. You know, you can't help thinking that now.
I tell you what,
Melanie. It's but I just want to ask you one question, if you don't mind, Richie.
Not at all. Ask me anything.
Dean Henderson, can't find him.
Oh, Dean, it's funny you said that. I sent Dean a Skype message the other day to ask him how he was and would he come back on. Right. I know that his old email address, you might have corresponded with Dean. His about 5 or 6 months ago, they kicked him off WordPress, didn't they? His website was kicked off.
Yes.
And he's had issues since then, yeah. But I'll find out. I will make it my business over the weekend and I'll get him back on the programme. Because I love Dean, yeah. Melanie, it's been a tonic. Thanks for coming on again up there in Newcastle. We'll talk anthropology again in the future, no doubt.
Brilliant. Yes, you take care. Thank you so much, Richie.
Not at all. Real pleasure. Look after yourself, Melanie, and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Fantastic calls today. Thanks to everybody who called in. I really appreciate that. It means everything to me that you do that. So to everybody, to Andy and to Julian and to Andrea in Oz, to Melanie there. We had another Andy, didn't we, as well. Thanks for calling in. Big thanks to Kevin Myers. I know there are one or two things Kevin said you won't agree with. That's all right. He's a fantastic guy. He's a great guy. He's a really interesting guy. Great writer. A great humanitarian. And I hope he does put a website together and start writing again. I told him I don't agree with his opinions on China and the virus. And I mentioned Fauci, of course, and all of that. That's what we do, you see. We talk to people we disagree with. And we enjoy them. Because ultimately, most of us can see what's happening. We might see what is happening. And we might think that we might use a different mathematical equation to understand it. I mean, Kevin Myers knows that the world is going to shit. But he sees the chain of events leading up to it in a different light than maybe I would. But it's important that we talk to people who see the world differently than we do. I know some of you melt down. I made the point, you know, I'll raise your criticisms of China and I will see them with the United States, Israel, the UK, France, and so on. Listen, have a great weekend. I'll talk to you on Sunday. I've gone over, so I'm going to chop the programme up into 3 parts for YouTube. I will not be posting the entire programme on YouTube. Not today. I'll put 3 parts on. I'll put the news roundup, the phone-in show, and Kevin's interview. But the programme, unedited, will be on Podomatic, Spotify, iTunes, and all the rest of it in around about a half an hour's time. Look after yourselves. Look after yourselves. Look after the people living next door to you. Got to start caring about people again. I love you. I'll see you on Sunday. Bye now.